Three massive dogs, circling, attacking, unstoppable. A lone mother bobcat had faced down three furious mastiffs to protect the one thing that mattered most: her baby. But her sacrifice bought only a few precious seconds. Now, a tiny, injured kitten was left orphaned, surrounded by the three large, aggressive dogs. She shivered, pressed tightly against a tree trunk. One of her eyes was clouded and swollen shut. She barely moved, only trembling weakly. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, an unlikely hero intervened. A human. A calm presence cut through the chaotic barking. In that moment, between fear and fury, an unexpected rescuer changed everything. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The morning mist still clung to the pine trees along the Salmon River in northern Idaho when Margaret Sullivan heard the commotion. It was barely past dawn on that October day, and the retired veterinary nurse had been enjoying her coffee on the cabin porch, watching the sun paint golden streaks across the water. Then came the sound that made her blood run cold. The savage barking of dogs mixed with something else. A wild, desperate yowling that spoke of a life-and-death struggle. Margaret abandoned her coffee mug on the railing and grabbed her walking stick, hurrying toward the noise. Her property bordered the Nez Perce National Forest, and over the years living here, she'd grown accustomed to the occasional wildlife encounter. But this was different. This sounded like war. As she pushed through the undergrowth, following an old deer trail she knew well, the sounds grew more intense. Through the trees, she spotted them. Three large dogs, muscled and aggressive, circling something near a fallen log. Margaret's heart sank when she recognized them as the mastiff mixes that belonged to the Hawthorne place 2 miles down the road. Those dogs had a reputation for running loose despite repeated complaints to animal control. Drawing closer, Margaret gasped at the scene before her. A female bobcat, her tawny coat matted with blood, stood defiantly atop the log, her lips pulled back in a fierce snarl. Even from 20 feet away, Margaret could see the terrible wounds along the cat's flanks and shoulders. The mother bobcat swayed on her feet but held her ground, and that's when Margaret understood why. Tucked beneath the log, barely visible in the shadows, was a tiny spotted form. A kitten. "Get back!" Margaret shouted at the dogs, waving her walking stick. "Get away from her!" The dogs turned briefly, considering this new threat, but their blood was up from the hunt. The largest, a brindle-colored brute, lunged at the mother bobcat again. She met him with claws and fury, but her strength was failing. The impact knocked her from the log, and she crumpled to the forest floor with a sound that would haunt Margaret's dreams for months to come. "No!" Margaret rushed forward, striking at the dogs with her stick, her voice rising to a roar that surprised even her. "Get out! Get away!" Perhaps it was the sudden human intervention, or perhaps they sensed their quarry was finished, but the dogs finally retreated, loping back through the forest toward wherever they'd come from. Margaret dropped to her knees beside the fallen bobcat, her trained hands automatically checking for signs of life, even as her eyes told her what her heart didn't want to accept. The mother's amber eyes were already glazing over, but in their depths, Margaret saw something that transcended species. A mother's final, desperate plea. The bobcat's gaze flickered toward the log, toward her hidden baby, and then the light faded completely. Margaret sat back on her heels, tears streaming down her weathered face. In her 30 years as a veterinary nurse, she'd seen death many times, but witnessing this mother's ultimate sacrifice struck her to her core. Then, cutting through her grief, came a sound so small she almost missed it. A tiny, frightened mewing from beneath the log. Moving carefully, Margaret peered into the shadowy space. There, pressed against the rotting wood, was a bobcat kitten no bigger than a house cat. The baby couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 months old, still bearing the spotted coat of youth. One eye was swollen shut, weeping with injury, and the little creature trembled violently. "Oh, sweetheart," Margaret whispered, her voice catching. "Your mama fought so hard for you." She knew better than to reach for a wild animal, even a baby. Instead, she pulled out her cell phone, grateful that she got decent reception this close to her cabin, and called the Rocky Mountain Wildlife Rehabilitation Center 40 miles away in Coeur d'Alene. Dr. James Morrison answered on the 3rd ring. Margaret had volunteered at the center years ago and knew James well. He was one of the best wildlife veterinarians in the Northwest. "James, it's Margaret Sullivan. I need help. I've got an orphaned bobcat kitten here, injured, mother killed by dogs. Can you come?" "How bad is the injury?" James's voice immediately shifted to professional mode. "Eye trauma for certain, possibly more. The kitten's in shock, maybe 4 months old. Keep watch, but don't approach. I'm bringing the team. 40 minutes." While she waited, Margaret maintained a respectful distance from the kitten, sitting quietly nearby to ensure no other predators approached. She couldn't help but study the mother's still form, noting the numerous scars on her body. Not just from this final battle, but older ones too. This cat had been a fighter, a survivor, until the very end. The rescue team arrived in 35 minutes. James must have broken speed limits. With him was Sarah Whitmore, a young wildlife biologist who specialized in wild cats, and Tom Bradley, a volunteer who'd helped with countless rescues. "Where's the kitten?" James asked, already pulling on thick gloves. Margaret pointed to the log. James approached slowly, speaking in low, soothing tones. The kitten hissed weakly but was too injured and exhausted to flee. With practiced movements, James gently extracted the baby, immediately noting the damaged eye and several puncture wounds on the small body. "These look like they're from the mother's teeth," Sarah observed, examining the kitten as James held it. "She must have carried the baby here, tried to hide it." The image of the mother bobcat, already wounded herself, carrying her baby to safety while being pursued by dogs, brought fresh tears to Margaret's eyes. "We need to get this little one to the center immediately," James said, carefully placing the kitten in a specially designed carrier. "The eye needs surgery within hours if we're going to save it." As the team prepared to leave, Tom and Sarah carefully wrapped the mother bobcat's body in a blanket. "We'll have her cremated properly," Sarah told Margaret. "She deserves that respect." Margaret nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. At the Rocky Mountain Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, the surgical suite had been prepped before their arrival. Dr. Morrison worked with precise efficiency, cleaning wounds, administering antibiotics, and carefully examining the damaged eye. "The eye itself is salvageable," he announced after a thorough examination. "But there's significant trauma to the surrounding tissue. We'll need to operate immediately." The surgery took 3 hours. Margaret had driven to the center and waited in the observation room along with Sarah and several other staff members who'd heard about the dramatic rescue. When James finally emerged, pulling off his surgical mask, everyone held their breath. "She made it through," he said, and the room exhaled collectively. The eye should heal, though her vision might be slightly impaired. The other injuries are superficial, She's a fighter, like her mother. Over the next days, the kitten, whom the staff began calling River after the Salmon River where she was found, slowly began to recover. At first, she cowered in the corner of her enclosure, refusing food and water. Margaret visited daily, sitting quietly outside the enclosure, reading aloud from books in a soft voice. "I know it sounds crazy," she told Sarah one afternoon, "but I feel like I owe it to her mother, to let her know she's not alone." Sarah didn't think it was crazy at all. Wild animals understand more than we give them credit for. She knows you're not a threat. It was volunteer Tom Bradley who had the breakthrough. A gruff man in his 60s who'd spent his life in the Idaho wilderness. Tom had a gift with frightened animals. He discovered that River responded to a particular sound, a low, rumbling purr he made in his throat, not unlike the comfort sound mother bobcats make to their young. "My grandmother was part Nez Perce," Tom explained to the assembled staff. "She taught me that every creature has its own language. You just have to listen." Within a week, River was accepting food from tongs held by Tom. Within 2 weeks, she was exploring her enclosure, though always retreating when anyone but Tom approached. Her injured eye was healing remarkably well, the swelling gone and her vision returning gradually. As River grew stronger, the rehabilitation team faced a crucial challenge: how to prepare an orphaned bobcat kitten for life in the wild without her mother's guidance. In normal circumstances, bobcat kittens stay with their mothers for up to a year, learning essential hunting and survival skills. "We need to be creative," James explained at a staff meeting. "She needs to learn to hunt, to fear humans appropriately, and to navigate territory, all without a mother to teach her." Sarah proposed an innovative solution. There's a wildlife sanctuary in Montana that has an older female bobcat who can't be released due to a leg injury. She's raised orphaned kittens before. If we could arrange a temporary transfer. It took weeks of paperwork and coordination, but eventually, River was transported to the Glacier Wildlife Sanctuary where Ruby, a 12-year-old female bobcat, resided. The introduction was done carefully, with the cat separated by mesh at first. Margaret made the journey to Montana to witness the meeting. She watched, hardly breathing, as Ruby approached the mesh barrier where River crouched, uncertain. The older bobcat made a low, churring sound. "A greeting," Sarah explained. River's ears perked forward, and tentatively, she responded with a tiny churr of her own. "That's remarkable," whispered Dr. Patricia Jeffers, the sanctuary veterinarian. "Ruby's never accepted a kitten this quickly before." Over the winter months, Ruby taught River the skills her birth mother couldn't. Margaret visited monthly, watching from an observation blind as Ruby demonstrated hunting techniques using prey items provided by the sanctuary staff. She showed River how to stalk, how to pounce, how to cache food for leaner times. More importantly, Ruby taught River the silent language of their species. The ear positions that signaled danger, the tail movements that conveyed mood, the vocalizations that meant everything from contentment to warning. As spring approached, River had transformed from a traumatized kitten into a sleek, confident young bobcat. Her injured eye had healed completely, leaving only a slight cloudiness that didn't impair her vision significantly. She could take down prey with precision, navigate complex terrain, and most importantly, she had developed the proper wariness of humans that would keep her safe in the wild. The release date was set for early May, when the Idaho mountains would be lush with spring growth and prey would be abundant. The location chosen was a protected area within the Nez Perce National Forest, far from roads and human habitation, but not far from where River had been found. It seemed fitting that she should return to her mother's territory. The release day dawned clear and bright. Margaret was there, of course, along with James, Sarah, Tom, and a small group of others who'd been involved in River's rescue and rehabilitation. Even Dr. Jeffers had driven over from Montana to witness the occasion. The transport carrier was placed at the edge of a meadow surrounded by old-growth forest. James opened the door and stepped back. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then River's head appeared, her ears swiveling as she tested the air. She emerged slowly, each movement cautious and deliberate. Margaret found herself holding her breath as River took her first steps into freedom. The young bobcat paused, looking back toward the humans who had saved her life. For just a moment, her gaze locked with Margaret's, and in those wild amber eyes, so like her mother's, Margaret saw recognition, perhaps even gratitude. Then River turned and bounded into the forest, her spotted coat quickly blending with the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees. Within seconds, she had vanished, returned to the wild where she belonged. The group stood in silence for several minutes, each processing the moment in their own way. Tom was the first to speak, his gruff voice uncharacteristically emotional. Her mama would be proud. Margaret nodded, wiping away tears. She fought to give her baby a chance at life. We just finished what she started. In the months that followed, trail cameras in the area occasionally captured images of River. She had established a territory not far from where she was released, successfully hunting and thriving in the wild. One photograph, taken at dusk near a creek, showed her in perfect profile, strong, healthy, and free. Margaret had that photograph framed and hung in her cabin, next to a sketch Sarah had done of River's mother in her final defiant stand. Visitors often asked about the images, and Margaret would tell them the story of a mother's ultimate sacrifice, of humans who chose compassion over indifference, and of a little survivor named River who carried both her mother's fierce spirit and the kindness of strangers into her wild future. The Rocky Mountain Wildlife Rehabilitation Center used River's case to secure additional funding for their Bobcat rehabilitation program. They established the River Fund, specifically designated for helping orphaned and injured wildcats. Within a year, they had successfully rehabilitated and released 3 more bobcats, each one a testament to what could be accomplished when people chose to help rather than harm. Dr. Morrison published a paper on their innovative rehabilitation techniques, particularly the use of surrogate mothers from sanctuaries, which was adopted by wildlife centers across the country. Ruby, the sanctuary bobcat who had fostered River, went on to raise 2 more orphaned kittens before her peaceful passing at the age of 15. Tom Bradley, inspired by River's story, began leading educational programs in local schools, teaching children about native wildlife and the importance of keeping dogs controlled to prevent wildlife attacks. His gruff manner softened when he spoke about River, and children were captivated by his stories of the brave little bobcat and her courageous mother. Sarah Whitmore continued her research on bobcat behavior, using insights gained from River's rehabilitation to better understand how orphaned cubs could be prepared for wild release. Her work contributed to a significant increase in successful bobcat rehabilitation rates throughout the Pacific Northwest. As for Margaret Sullivan, she became a regular volunteer at the rehabilitation center again, specializing in the initial care of traumatized wildlife. She had a particular gift for sitting quietly with frightened animals, her presence somehow reassuring. She often thought of River's mother during these vigils, remembering that fierce maternal love that transcended species boundaries. On the first anniversary of River's release, Margaret hiked to the spot where she'd first encountered the mother bobcat's last stand. Someone, she suspected Tom, had placed a small memorial stone there, engraved with simple words: "A mother's love knows no bounds." Margaret knelt beside the stone, placing a small bouquet of wildflowers against it. As she stood to leave, movement caught her eye. There, on a rocky outcrop 50 yards away, sat a bobcat. The afternoon sun caught the slight cloudiness in one eye, and Margaret's heart leaped. River sat perfectly still, watching the human who had been present at both the worst and best moments of her young life. They regarded each other across the distance, two souls touched by tragedy and bound by compassion. Then, with the fluid grace of her kind, River disappeared into the forest shadows. Margaret smiled through her tears. River was not just surviving, she was thriving. The mother bobcat's sacrifice had not been in vain. Her legacy lived on in her daughter's every successful hunt, every claimed territory marker, every wild, free day under the Idaho sky. Walking back to her cabin, Margaret reflected on how one tragic morning had rippled outward, touching so many lives. The rehabilitation center had grown stronger. Techniques had been developed that would save countless wild lives, and people had been reminded of their capacity for compassion. But most of all, a small spotted kitten who should have died beside her mother had instead grown into a magnificent predator, roaming the forests her ancestors had claimed for generations. River was living proof that sometimes, when humans choose to help rather than harm, even the most heartbreaking beginnings can lead to triumphant endings. The work continued. Every spring brought orphaned and injured wildlife to the center, each one a reminder of the delicate balance between human civilization and wild spaces. But River's story had changed something fundamental in how the community viewed these creatures. Dogs were kept better controlled, drivers were more cautious on forest roads, and children grew up understanding that they shared this land with magnificent wild neighbors deserving of respect and protection. Years later, when Margaret was too elderly to make the trek into the forest, she would sit on her porch, looking toward the mountains where River roamed. Sometimes, on quiet nights, she could hear the distant call of bobcats echoing through the valleys. She liked to imagine that one of those voices belonged to River, or perhaps to River's own offspring, carrying forward the fierce bloodline of a mother who gave everything for her child. The story of the mother bobcat and her surviving kitten became local legend, told and retold around campfires and in classrooms. Each telling emphasized different aspects: the mother's courage, the rescuer's compassion, the innovative rehabilitation techniques, or River's successful return to the wild. But at its heart, the story remained the same: a testament to the power of love, sacrifice, and the human capacity to make a difference in the life of even the smallest wild creature. As Dr. Morrison often said when concluding his lectures about River's case, we cannot undo the tragedies that befall wildlife, but we can choose to be part of the solution. Every life saved, every successful release, honors not just that individual animal, but all the wild mothers who fight impossible battles for their young. River's story reminds us that we have the power to complete what nature begins, to be the bridge between tragedy and triumph. And so River lived on, wild and free, a living memorial to her mother's love and the compassion of strangers who refused to let that sacrifice be in vain. Her story continued to inspire new generations of wildlife rehabilitators, volunteers, and ordinary people who understood that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change the world, one precious life at a time.